Now we can do it. Well, I just hit. Hit that. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, so just for context, the Red River Basin. And, you know, it provides, it's occupied by Manitoba, North Dakota, Minnesota, and a little corner of South Dakota down there. And these rivers that have international connections, and we have two of them in North Dakota, the Red River and the Souris River, they're administered by the International Joint Commission. Okay, so what I'd like to point out is Emerson's right at the border, and we'll talk a little bit about Alexander Henry and some of that, but first let's continue. So in the spring of 2020, the International Joint Commission, I'll let you read this, but they made a recommendation to the Red River Board to make decisions on nutrient concentrations. And so there are two for total phosphorus and there are two for nitrogen. I'm only going to consider the phosphorus. And then they talk about a rigorous 9-year-long effort. And I don't dispute that. Then in the fall of 2022, they accepted these recommendations, and I'll talk about them. Now, they're non-regulatory, which means they're not enforceable. But both the government of Canada and the government of the US accepted these standards. Again, they're non-regulatory. But, and the goal is really, particularly, it's basically Lake Winnipeg is the big issue. They're finding more and more hazardous algal blooms in Lake Winnipeg. And so they're trying to do something. And I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that's a good idea that they try to do something. But my concern is that these recommendations are too low. And so you see the total phosphorus concentration objective. It's 0.15 milligrams per liter. And it's the seasonal average, basically the ice out period. And then they have a nutrient target load of 1,400 tons of total phosphorus per year on a 5-year running average. So what I'm saying is, I think these standards are too low. And I'll explain why I think they're too low. Okay, so they integrated two approaches for the objective. So that's the water quality milligrams per liter. And again, I'm only looking at phosphorus. So the milligrams per liter of phosphorus, that's based on a stress response model. And the targets, the total phosphorus load, as well as the total nitrogen load, but I'm not really looking at that. It's principally for Lake Winnipeg and the hazardous algal blooms. So hazardous algal blooms, they're attributed to the mobilization of nutrients. And in many cases, agriculture gets the finger pointed at them. But I just want to share for context, about 1.5 years ago, have you guys ever heard of Isle Royale? Yeah, so it's a cool place. So about 1.5 years ago, my daughter and I went there. It's the largest island in Lake Superior. It's a national park. It's closer to Canada, but it's considered US property. You can take a ferry from Minnesota. You can take a ferry from Michigan. Never been subjected to agriculture. They had 2 lakes when we went, this is 1.5 years ago now, that were subject to hazardous algal blooms. The state of Minnesota hired a guy who studied hazardous algal blooms for his dissertation in Iowa. And he went to the boundary waters and he said 2 portages in. So by the time you get 2 portages in, you're typically in the wilderness area. He said he saw some of the worst hazardous algal blooms of his life. All right. Again, no agriculture. So what I'm saying is, well, first of all, there have been hazardous algal blooms in Lake Michigan. Lake Winnipeg, since probably before some of us were born. Okay, so it's not unique. Okay, I'd like to point out this third point. Other approaches were considered, one of which would use a reference condition. But there is no reference for the Red River. All right, so what happened is, the result is that the earliest data they considered were from 1970, which makes sense. That's because when the USGS began to publish, results, hard results. And the phytoplankton and periphyton data were from 2015. So this again is looking at, are these bacteria going to form hazardous algal blooms and things like that? Okay. So I'm going to go back in time, and to me this is fun, but it's less quantitative. But let's look at Alexander Henry. Now there are two Alexander Henrys. So about a year and a half ago, my wife and I went to Mackinac Island in Michigan. And they talk about Alexander Henry being there. Well, this isn't Alexander Henry the Younger. It has to be Alexander Henry the Older. All right, so you got to be careful in the literature to keep these two guys straight. I think Alexander Henry the Younger is the nephew to Alexander Henry. Yeah, Alexander Henry the Older is the uncle. Okay. Well, Alexander Henry, and it's a really fun read. This journal is available. It's several sources for free. Okay. And so what happened is a guy by the name of Elliot, and if you go online, it's pronounced cows. It looks like coos, but it's pronounced cows. And so there's an actual cow's deer that it's a subspecies of the whitetail that's down in Arizona and the northwestern desert area. So he published Alexander Henry's records, okay, his journals. And if you look closely, basically, the main text is Henry's journal. And then he used some of Thomson's contributions and some of his own contributions as footnotes. Okay, so the main text is basically verbatim from Alexander Henry's journals. And he kept great records, and you ought to look him up. It's really a fun read. And I used to read a little bit before my hydrogeology class, because there's some really interesting hydrology, over 200 years ago. For reference, well, here, let's do this. So for reference, Grand Forks was incorporated as a city in the late 1880s. Okay, so when he got here, he records grizzly bears to the Red River. He records wolverines, bison. It's really, it would have been fantastic to live a few days. Okay, but what I want to point out is in September in 1800, he went upriver and he crossed into US territory. All right. And soon after, he found an area that he called the Bois Piercé. Bois means wood, piercé means pierce, opening. Okay. And so this is basically right across the Canadian border. And look at that. Immense herds, he called them buffalo. We'd call them bison. Okay. The meadows were alive of them. On the east side of the river, we now for the first time saw buffaloes. So on the east side, Minnesota side, they appeared, now modern day, there appeared to be as many as were on the west side, and they formed a fort about a half mile from the river at the Park River. That fort's never been found. They thought, probably has been washed away by floods. But I want you to point out here, between the Park River and what he called the Panbian River, which is now the Pembina River, there's one continual level plain. This is about 35 miles. and you couldn't see any trees. None. Okay, so the trees that we now have been planted and been nurtured by humans. So 35 miles, that's important. So once again, here's the approximate location of Henry's Fort here at the Park River. And there's about 35 miles from here up to the Pembina River. No trees. But he could see. And so what he used to do from his fort in the Park River, there was a pin oak that he used to travel. He used to climb every day and he'd look out over the prairies. And here are some of his journal entries. In September, he went up to the oak tree. I saw more bison, more buffalo than ever. They formed one body commencing about a half mile, that's a typo, about a half mile from camp, whence the plain was covered on the west side of the river as far as the eye could reach. That's probably dozens of miles when you're in a tree. Again, bison as far as the eye could reach. Noticed in January, this is just before ice out. This is about 223 years ago. Look at that. He says, opposite. Okay, I got up and was astonished when I climbed into the southwest bastion. On my right, the plains were black and appeared as if in motion, south to north. Opposite the fort, the ice was covered. And on my left, to the utmost extent, anyway, I'll let you read that stuff. But nothing in comparison to what I now beheld. The ground was covered at every point of the compass as far as the eye could reach, and every animal was in motion. This happened for 2 days, at least. Okay. Saw this huge, you can speculate how many are there, but I think there's a lot. Okay, now Alexander Henry was really enthralled with the abundance of wildlife, but he was astonished with the environmental havoc that they caused. So you see in September, bears make prodigious ravages of the brush. Notice here, we'll come back to this, ice out at the end of March. And notice he found great numbers of dead bison that he attributed to drowning. The river's now clear of ice a couple days later, but it's really astonishing at what vast numbers have perished. They form one continuous line in the current for 2 days and nights. But look, drowned buffalo drift as usual. So this happened over the course of at least a month, 31 days at least. And then there's a footnote that Howes added that 6 years earlier, so in the late 1700s, John McDowell in one day counted over 7,000 dead bison mired along the Qu'Appelle River, which is a tributary to the Assiniboine, which of course connects with the Red River up in Winnipeg. All right. Notice beginning of March, the stench from the vast numbers of drowned buffalo along the river was intolerable. Day 2. 2 hunters arrived in a skin canoe from Grand Forks, okay, in French, with 30 beaver and 7 bear skins. They tell me that the number of buffalo lying along the beach and on the banks above passes all imagination. They form one continuous line and emit a horrid stench. He had one entry where he couldn't eat. It smelled so bad. I'm informed that every spring it is about the same. So we're talking about a 40-mile distance. This is a linear distance. This is not river miles. This is a linear distance, a map distance. Okay, who cares? Well, bison are a huge source of total phosphorus. Some people say that the first harvest of the European pioneers was that they collected bison bones. And one of the purposes of the bison bones was for fertilizer, phosphorus fertilizer. So I'll let you read that. But you know, there's a lot of dung produced by bison. And so this is about the only hard geology, apatite, right? So it's a phosphorus mineral. So teeth and bones are roughly 18.5%. But you see this is a classic picture. It's sad, really. But this is the classic picture of bison skulls collected. Now, I've never hiked a lot along the Red River. This is an aside, but I have hiked a lot along the Missouri River. And if you go to places that haven't been picked over, you'll see a lot of bison bones to this day. So presumably that's the way it was in the Red River. Okay, so I'll let you speculate how many hundreds of thousands. I would think it's millions of bison Henry saw. I'll let you do that. Or how many tens of thousands of dead bison floated toward Lake Winnipeg during the 1801 spring thaw? Or how many tens of thousands of dead bison line the shoreline downstream of Grand Forks? Okay, the point is the Red River Basin of Henry's day was bison dominated. Therefore, phosphorus was abundant. Okay, now, but are these observations supported elsewhere? Well, there's not a whole lot of bison dominated rivers left in the world, at least not American bison. But here's a paper, Bunting took 3 sediment cores. You can look at the years of determination and go back to 1800 when Alexander Henry wrote. But notice you have this peak in non-apatite. So this would mean if it's non-apatite, it would be not related to bones and teeth. In the in the 1800s, 1820s, there's you see a pretty good peak in core 2, and in 1850s, you see a peak. This is before any agriculture. Any, white guys were, just a few traders here or there. Well, something extraordinary happened because this peak is the largest on record for 200 years. And it happened before Europeans got there. You can only presume, you can only guess what happened. The largest floods on record in Winnipeg, which was established mid-1820s and early 1850s by one of your own. She's passed on now, right? Okay, now, it's speculation. I have no way to know for sure. But something extraordinary happened here. And I think it's consistent with the idea that the largest flooding on record in Winnipeg, which would be the Assiniboine and the Red River, happened in the mid-1820s. But is this observation supported elsewhere? Okay, now we go to the Lamar River. The Lamar River in Yellowstone National Park is a trout stream. I went through there a year ago, well, last June. All right. And if you go through the northeast entrance, you go through the Lamar Valley. I exited the northeast entrance. It's fantastic. I mean, they call it the American Serengeti. But you go upstream. So when you turn off to the Lamar Valley, it was full of bison, and they had just done, the cows had just finished calving, and the calves are kind of a milk chocolate brown, and the bulls and the cows are kind of a dark chocolate brown, but you can tell the calves. It was magnificent. I saw hundreds, maybe a couple thousand. But when you get upstream even further, it's a trout stream. You see guys fly fishing in there, right? Okay, so I'm comparing the Lamar River to Yellowstone National Park to the Red River. Okay, well, look, the total dissolved solids is you know, anywhere from half to 1.5 orders of magnitude more in the Red River. I mean, that's how it got its name, right? Whoops, sorry. Okay, so you see bison in the Lamar Valley. It's really wonderful. I encourage everyone to go there. It's really amazing. But am I saying, look, it's different. So there's mountains, right? So I'm looking, I think we're looking to the south here. When Alexander Henry would get on his tree, he would look north and he could see as far as the Pembina River, 35 miles away. Do you think you got a view of 35 miles there? I don't know, 15, 20, something. But is it covered as far as the eye can see? No. That's what Alexander Henry said the Red River Basin is at times. So here's what I'm doing. I'm comparing the Lamar River with the Red River in this regard. They're nothing alike ecologically. I mean, you know, the big fish in the Red River, catfish, right? You got brown trout in the upper reaches of the Lamar River. But they're comparable in two ways. Both are essentially untouched by humans, and both are bison dominated. So what I'm looking at now is the bison domination of the Lamar Valley. So this is a paper Breshta published it in 2020. He wrote about 2016 conditions. But he's saying that the bison have so overrun the Lamar Valley that it's chasing the elk out. But when he wrote this, there was about 4,000 animals. Now they say there's probably more than 5,000. And we're talking about the entire park, not just the Lamar Valley. Chances are a majority of them are, you know, or at least come to the Lamar Valley once a year. But we're talking about a few thousand animals. Now, what I'd like you to do, I'll let you do this yourself, but compare what Alexander Henry wrote in 1800 to what Breshta wrote about the Lamar River Valley in 2020. Notice the bison are rubbing the trees and basically, basically destroying the trees. And you see the same thing in Henry's spot, 200 years previous, over 200 years previous. Notice here, so they accelerate the biological and physical modifications of the valley, seeps, wetlands, floodplains, etc. Much like that, often associated with high levels of domestic livestock. The bare ground is more trampled by these cattle, meaning bison, big buffaloes, than the gate of a farmyard. This is at the confluence of the Park River and the Yellowstone. So you see some really big similarities there. I think it's really fascinating. Okay, well, what about water quality in the Lamar River? Well, first of all, everything except total hardness that I'm showing now is non-detect. Everything. Ammonia is nitrogen, chloride, nitrate, nitrogen, orthophosphate, which is considered probably the reactive type. Look at that, non-detect. If you can turn on the tap water and you get some water from the Bismarck water treatment plant, we have more hardness than the Lamar River has. I mean, there's no place in North Dakota with water of this quality, not even out of your tap. Okay, let's look at total phosphorus. Ha! Look at that. In the Lamar River, influenced by a few thousand bison, 0.15 milligrams per liter. That's the objective. Now it's seasonally averaged, you know. But a few thousand bison apparently are causing that kind of total phosphorus. Now, what I've done is I've taken the hydrograph for the Lamar River in Breshta. I'm sorry, yeah, adapted from Lewandowski. And I superimposed on them the water quality standards that you see here, day 105, day 147, day 161, et cetera. The best I could, I had to estimate. But, you know, here we have the first peak. It's pretty complicated, right? You have the first peak and you have a lot of phosphorus. Then you have another peak and, you know, you don't have very much phosphorus. Then you have another peak, and this is where you had the highest phosphorus. This is indicative of runoff, okay, because you have the phosphorus associated with the peaks, the high peaks. Not this one so much, but surely this one and this one. And the best I could do, flow average TP is about 0.1. I mean, it's not terribly accurate, but it's surely in order of magnitude 0.1. You know, it's not 0.01, it's not 1, it's 0.1. And what I want to compare that is the mean discharge in the Red River at Emerson is about 4,700 cubic feet per second. So you're probably, you know, a half to one, you know, this is probably, 150. So about 30 times, maybe. The flow in the Red River is about 30 times. But remember, this phosphorus was attributed to 4,000 bison over the entire Yellowstone. So maybe 2,000 or 3,000. Okay. We had more than 2,000 or 3,000, I think, in the Red River in Henry's day. So my point is this. So we've looked at the objective for water quality, 0.15. And I'm saying that it's likely that that concentration was exceeded before, you know, by natural causes, before humankind, before, you know, modern agriculture, for sure. Now let's look at the total load. I think that's next. Okay, so we have two objectives for phosphorus, right? We have a concentration objective, which I think it's likely to have been exceeded. We're not considering any of the phosphorus from the dead bison on the banks. We're not considering any phosphorus that's contributed by sediment. We're talking about, at least not much, we're talking about phosphorus contributed by bison. Now let's look at the total phosphorus target load for the Red River Basin. Again, based upon eyewitness accounts. So we already mentioned that the ice broke up the end of March. And all the way till at least the end of April, he saw a continuous line of bison flowing in the river. And we talked about the horrible stench. So what I've tried to do is take a minimalist envelope approach, kind of, you know, how much total phosphorus is that going to represent? Bison flowing past his fort at Park River and presumably flowing into Emerson. Okay, so I did the best I could, you know, so the average weight of a calf in October that was born in the spring, early summer, they're typically born around May, June, middle of June. 140, about 142 kilograms for a cow or a calf. The male, the bulls are much bigger than the females. But I looked in the literature and I tried to find the smaller estimate, and this was 475.5 kilograms for an average weight of about 360 kilograms per animal. I'm estimating. I don't know. I'm saying half of them are calves, you know. I took the average between full-grown males and females and yearlings. And most of the literature, I found one exception, I found 3 that supported it, indicate that there are more males born than females. I just said 50-50. So I'm taking a minimalist approach. Then I went to Prang et al. And what he did for mammals, he has the body mass as a function of skeletal mass. And now he doesn't have bison on there, but he has humans, Homo sapiens, and elephants. But notice that this estimate, it underestimates. So again, I'm taking the low here for bison. Okay, chances are it's probably up here more, but we're just using what he has. Pretty good fit. And it comes out to about 37 kilograms for a mass of skeleton. This is wet mass, not dry mass. Okay, so we've already said that bones and teeth have a high concentration of appetite, which, stoichiometrically is about 18.5%. But we're going to assume that the skeleton has 15% phosphorus. And if you estimate based on the skeleton of a bison, 15%, it's going to be about 12 1/3 pounds. And I'm just saying, let's just assume 12 pounds. So I'm trying to take a low approach. So again, we have, if you look, we have at least 31 days, maybe even more, but at least 31 days. So the bison are moving downstream 31 days. The average velocity in the Red River, this is based upon Lefevre. Now, they say it's 1 during flood and during the summer, 1 foot per second, and during floods it probably reaches speeds of 8 feet per second. Now this is the average. Remember, the Red River was almost a mile wide during the flood, when Julie Lefevre was writing her report, the flood of 1997. All right. So in the middle of the stream, if you've ever looked at velocity estimates, the fastest velocity is in the middle of the stream, just a few inches below the surface. But she's talking about, she and her colleagues, average velocity. So I'm going to assume a river velocity of 5 feet per second. It's probably 2 or 3 times that amount or more, where the bison are in the middle of the stream. But I'm saying 1 bison every 50 feet or every 10 seconds. 31 days. This is how many seconds per day. Well, that's not right, is it? Yeah, 60. Yeah, that's right. I think that is right. Hopefully that's right. But it works out to be, from a minimalist perspective, about 1,600 tons of phosphorus contributed by these bison. We're not talking about the phosphorus along the riverbank from decaying critters. We're not talking about phosphorus contributed by the sediment. The IJC total phosphorus load target's 14 tons. So we almost certainly, now 5-year running average, I don't know. All I can say is what these 2 hunters said is that every spring it's about the same. Best I can do. Okay, so looking at data from Henry, he documented bison as far as the eye could reach from a tree. We know that bison bones and dung are enriched in phosphorus. We know that Lake Winnipeg the sediments from 200 years ago are enriched in phosphorus. We're making some comparisons with the bison-dominated river in the Yellowstone National Park and doing some minimalistic envelope calculations. I think it's likely that the total phosphorus concentration objective was exceeded, and it's almost certain to have been exceeded for the Red River, for the target load during natural conditions. And so therefore, I'm saying the IJC recommendations are unrealistic. I think they're too low. Who cares? It's non-regulatory. You're right. It is. It's non-regulatory. But I'm going to tell you, there's two people, one person from Canada and one person from Minnesota, who's tracking this, because I was just at the conference last week at the Red River Basin. They're tracking this and they're saying, are we meeting these objectives? Are we meeting these objectives? Well, they're non-regulatory. But they're also, in my opinion, they're too low. Well, I have some references. You can look those